Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hi.
Okay. So it's very interesting. The group grew quite dramatically this week. I don't know if any of you were noticing how many new people were added. Um, Valerie, you're on here twice. Are you on two different devices? You don't know. Okay. All right. I have in the past started by asking new people to just say hello and just introduce themselves a little bit. And so, Valerie, I'm going to ask you to do that, and then we will figure out who else is here for the first time with us.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. First of all, we tried to download Zoom on my computer and neither one of us could get it done. So I'm on Bob's computer with Zoom. So I've watched Zoom stuff with him, but I've never had to try to do it totally by myself. So I have no clue why there's two of me on there. My name is Valerie. It's nice to meet all of you. Rivka and I go back a ways, and we are now living in Haslett, Texas, and we have had a long journey. We're Jewish now, of a sort.
Of a sort. Of a sort. Okay. And who else is new here? Linnell, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yes, it's Linnell. I'm Linnell. I'm in South Africa, Johannesburg, and I was introduced to your group by my friend Kathy Morgan. And so I thought I'd join and see what you guys are doing.
Great. Welcome. Okay. And Brittany, is this your first time here? Brittany, can you unmute yourself and tell me if this is your first time here? And here's Kathy now. Okay, Brittany can't hear me. I think we had some technical difficulties last time, if I remember correctly. Okay, let's just go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with sharing my screen, and we are going to do the letter. And actually, in order to teach this letter, I'm going to teach you two letters this week. And you'll see why in just a minute. Okay, so well, we don't need to see this part. We need to see this part bigger. Okay. All right. You can now see this screen. Yes. Somebody shake your head. Okay. Okay. So I hope that some of you have been looking at Hebrew text and looking at the letters that I've mentioned and naming them as you come upon them. We're going to today do two new letters. This first letter, and as I try to give it to you in a couple of different fonts so that you can recognize it more easily. This letter is Dalet, and its numerical value is 4. Okay, so it's like a line here. And then it's important to notice that the line going down is a little bit over to the left. Okay, so there's a line and a little bit over to the left. In this font, it's a little less obvious, but that is a Dalet. The numerical value of this letter is 4. And the next letter we call Hey, and its numerical value is 5. And the most noteworthy thing about the Hey is this little opening here. Okay, so you have sort of, this looks very much like a Dalet with another little piece here, and you have an opening here. Okay, so here's the little lesson that goes with Dalet and Hey, and that is the word for worry in Hebrew. The word for worry in Hebrew is da'aga, and it is spelled like this: Dalet Aleph Gimel Hey. So 4 of the 5 letters that begin the Hebrew alphabet are in this word. If you move them around, you reorder them in order, it's Aleph, Gimel, Dalet, and Hey, but it's missing a letter, and it's missing the letter Bet, which is the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And there's a reason for that. Okay, so Bet is the letter that begins the word bitachon, which means faith. Bitachon begins with bet. And the lesson is that without bitachon, without faith, you have da'aga. you have worries. Or if you have faith, you don't have worry. So that's the lesson. And that now you see why I had to show you both Dalet and Hey at the same time. But there's a lesson, the little mini Hebrew lesson with which we begin. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we are going to
Question.
I have a quick question.
yes.
I
go ahead,
thought
Lo-
that the word for faith in Hebrew was emunah.
Okay, that's
So
an
I'd
excellent
never heard
question.
of bitachon. What's the difference?
It's like this. This is how I understand it. Emuna is when it's kind of theoretical. Like you're in a situation and you have faith that something will change, but it doesn't really, it's not anything more than an emotion. Okay. And bitachon is where you enact your faith. Okay. So you're in a situation. Here's a great example. That comes from the Torah, that when Moses is at the Red Sea and the Egyptians are chasing them down behind them, and the sea is in front of them, and there appears to be no escape, there is one person who doesn't just have emunah that Hashem is going to resolve this issue, but he has bitachon. And what does he do? This is Nachshon ben Aminadav, and he steps into the Red Sea. That's bitachon. He's so sure that God is going to solve this, but it requires some action on his part. So that's sort of the difference. Does that help? Okay, great. All right. So today, based on the vote that we took in the group, we are going to talk about this concept of redemption and feminine equality. And in order to explain this concept to you, I have to teach you another Hebrew concept, which is the concept of tikkun. Some of you may have heard this word. In liberal Jewish circles, tikkun is often paired with olam, which means world, and it is often understood as what we might call in English social justice, meaning fixing the world, like taking care of poor people, feeding them, giving them clothing, things like that. It's an incredible diminishment of a profound concept in Torah, that it literally does mean a fixing or a repair of something got damaged. But spiritually, what we are speaking of, we say that the soul got damaged in one lifetime and it returns in another incarnation to complete its tikkun, to complete its spiritual rectification. So here's an example of this. By the way, this assumes that you understand the idea that in Torah thinking in Judaism, while it is not universally accepted, it is a foundational idea that we have all been here before, that our souls are not in these bodies for the very first time. Well, they may be in these bodies for the very first time, but they are not in the world for the very first time. Okay. So let's say that someone stole $1 million from another person in a particular lifetime, and then they die. They got away with it, whatever, they die. And that sin leaves a blemish on the soul of the thief. Now, God, in his mercy, brings that thief back in another lifetime, in another incarnation, in another set of circumstances, in order to rectify, to fix the blemish that's on his soul or her soul. Okay. Now, how could that happen? So, for example, that person maybe could come back as a financial advisor, and perhaps the person that they stole from came back as a client of that financial advisor. The financial advisor gave good advice and restored the money. This is totally an example I made up, by the way, but I'm just trying to make it very concrete. Or perhaps the reincarnated thief, because he was never punished for this sin in one lifetime, will be sent to jail in another lifetime for a crime that they did not actually commit. So to us, that looks terribly unjust, but it's punishment for what they did in a previous lifetime. Are you with me? Shake your head if you understand where I'm going with this. Okay, here's another example. A person sinned by speaking Lashon Hara. You may be familiar with this idea, but it's the Jewish prohibition against evil speech or gossip from which one person can truly harm another person. And I'm not talking about just embarrassing somebody or making somebody feel bad, but you, through speech misapplied, you could ruin a chance for somebody to get married. You could ruin a chance for somebody to make a living, to have a successful business, and so forth. And so in their next incarnation, if they sinned gravely with the power of their tongue, they might come back as a person who has no ability to speak. So there are, for example, some people who come back in bodies that are so profoundly handicapped that they do not have the power of speech. That would be another example. In Jewish thought, because we are so close to the end of days, we have all been here before, as I said, perhaps many times, and we're all working out our tikkunim. And that's why people have the particular troubles that they have. So if a person is constantly challenged with a repeating theme, they never have enough money, or they suffer with ill health, I'm not just talking about, like, a bout of something that gets cured, but something that, like, is perpetually with them, or they have trouble finding a partner. They can't seem to make a relationship with work. And Laura, I see that you made a comment, but I'm not able to look at it right now. We understand that they are making a tikkun from a previous life. This concept is very important because of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this book, which is called, I know it's hard for you to see what, it's called The Moon's Lost Light. Okay. And it takes this idea of tikkun to explain why the status of women is so complicated. Here's another example from Jewish life. So this doesn't apply to people who aren't Jewish, but I think it's a really good example of how, if we don't understand the concept of tikkun, things look one way to us and not another way. Okay, you may be familiar with this idea of a minyan. Basically, it's a prayer quorum. In Torah, a minyan in an Orthodox setting, a minyan is a minimum of 10 men who get together to pray. Some prayers can't be said if there are not at least 10 men present. And some people are offended by the idea that Jewish women can't be counted in a minyan, and they see that as discrimination, which on one level makes sense. So much so that in liberal Judaism, a minyan is made up of 10 Jews, male or female, and they feel like they are rectifying this discrimination, which on the surface of it does make some sense, unless you understand what the tikkun of a minyan is all about. So we have to go back to the book of Numbers, the book of Bamidbar, chapter 13, verse 2, and you just make a note of this and look it up, but I'll read you the verse in English. This is where Moshe, sends the spies to explore the land of Israel. And he says, send out for yourselves men who will scout the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. You shall this is God talking to Moshe. You shall send one man, each for his father's tribe. Each one shall be a chieftain in their midst. So we know there are 12 tribes. Okay, so one man from each tribe means that God is directing Moses to send 12 spies. And indeed, that's what he does. He picks one leader from each of the 12 tribes, and two of the spies break off from the other 10. Okay, so the two spies that break off are Yehoshua, Joshua, and Caleb, come back with a good and encouraging report about the land, but 10 of the spies bring back an evil report. And again, now we're in the book of Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, verse 32. They spread an evil report about the land which they had scouted, telling the children of Israel, the land we passed through to explore is a land that consumes its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are men of stature. Now, you may, if you're familiar with this story, and I assume that you are, you know that as a result of that evil report that 10 of the 12 made, the entire generation of men over the age of 20 were sentenced to die in the wilderness instead of going into the land right away. And that's why the people had to wander for 40 years, because they all had to die off. Okay. The date of that grave sin, by the way, was Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, which is a day of very bad luck for the Israelites. Okay, so let's connect these two things. A minyan is a tikkun. It's a spiritual rectification for the sin that this group of 10 men did. The tikkun now requires 10 men to gather to praise God, because this group of 10 men created what we know as the sin of the spies. So it's not that women are not counted in a minyan because there's something wrong with us. On the contrary, women are not counted in a minyan because we didn't participate in the sin of the spies, and we don't have anything to do a tikkun for. You see how that all comes together? Okay, so learning
That's
Torah.
very
Somebody want to say something? Linnell, you want to make a comment?
No, I just wanted to say that to me, that's very different to reincarnation. I don't know. That story is not. I mean, I understand the whole. Yeah. Yes,
Right.
you wanted to say something?
Well, you'll see how it connects as we go on, but I'm speaking about two different things. Tikkun and reincarnation. And I understand that like whenever I present a new idea, and I'm presenting an idea from a Torah perspective, it's okay if you don't buy it. It's okay if it doesn't resonate with what you already believe. All my job here is to explain to you like a Torah perspective. So tikkun can only happen if there's reincarnation. Okay. Because souls have to be fixed. But we'll go on. When we go on to the issue of women, maybe it'll become more clear. But my point is that when we learn Torah, it teaches us that there is a deeper level to everything, and it's not something that anyone can just like read a passage in the Bible, especially if they're reading a passage in English translation and they do not yet have command of Hebrew, and can expect to really understand the deeper idea. Okay, so that's part of what we're doing here. Is I'm trying to the extent that I can for with what I know, is to give you all of you this deeper understanding, because that's the joy of learning Torah. Okay, so now let's turn our attention to women, and we want to look at a story from the Talmud that happened at the very beginning of time. Now, I wrote the whole story out, but I'm going to I'm just going to sort of summarize it. Okay, there's certain rabbi that notices that there's these two verses that seem to contradict each other. One is in Genesis chapter 1, verse 16. God made two great lights. Okay. And it's also written in the same verse, the greater light to rule by day and the lesser light to rule by night, indicating one is better than the other. Okay. So right away, there's an issue here. Not going to be two great lights if one is lesser and one is greater. Okay. So this is how he explains it, that when God first created, and these two lights are the sun and the moon, by the way, that they were equally bright. When God first created the sun and the moon, they were equally bright. And the moon said before, now this requires a little opening of your mind, because how can the moon speak? But the moon in this story goes to God and says, how is it possible for two kings to serve with one crown? One of us has to be subservient to the other. And God says to the moon, which is female, okay, if that's the case, then you should go and diminish yourself. And she says to him, speaking to God, Master of the universe, I made a correct observation before you. Why do I have to diminish myself? And God says, as compensation, go and rule during the day along with the sun and during the night. And she says to him, what is the greatness of shining alongside the sun? What use is a candle in the middle of the day? There's a little bit more of the story. What follows is a conversation between Hashem and the moon, where Hashem is trying to comfort the moon for having diminished her. Okay. That's the basic story that underlies where we're going with this. And what the title of this book, The Moon's Lost Light, comes from this story. Now, like the sun and the moon, man and woman were originally created equal, but women's light was lessened. Okay. And the Chavetz Chaim writes that the diminishment of the moon was caused by the sin of Chava, of Eve. So this is the premise of the book. In the beginning, men and women were created with complete spiritual parity. There's a sin, and Chava eats from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and convinces Adam to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And her high spiritual light was lost and her status was diminished. Now, here's another thing that's going to require a leap, another Torah idea. Chava represented all women. She contained, however you understand this, her soul contained all future female souls. So therefore, all women for all of history would suffer from the curses that were given to Chava. The light, the high spiritual light that Chava, Eve, once possessed, this is the good news, will be returned to all women in Messianic times, because these curses were not meant to last forever. When their purpose is accomplished, when the tikkun is complete, they will disappear. And that's because when the damage is cured, the curses are no longer necessary. Okay, so it's and the world reverts to its ideal state that existed before the sin. Okay. Any questions before I go on? Because it's important to understand. Yes.
So you said when the tikkun is complete. So what completes it?
Well,
This is the
right. So I don't know the answer to that, because that is on God's, that's the way God measures things. But when God determines that the tikkun is complete, then things go back to plan A. So it's not something we know or we have control over, but as you'll see, some of these curses, we're going to talk about them in more detail, but some of these curses are already beginning to be diminished. So I'm sorry that that's the most complete answer I can give you, but we know that the full completion of the tikkun and the removal of all of the curses will occur when we are fully in redemption. We are operating under the assumption and presumption that we are in the Messianic era, and things are in the world, things are starting to come into the world. And Valerie, I see you want to say something. Give me one moment. And so we are in a process that's unfolding. Go ahead, Valerie, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Okay, well, one of the things that scripture just came to my mind for all of the Christians in the group. It was astonishing to us to figure out how much of the Mishnah and all the Talmud and stuff is actually in the New Testament. And it made me think of the verse that basically says, when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part gets done away with. And I know a lot of churches have developed their own their own explanations for that verse, but if it was coming from a Hebraic understanding, it might be exactly the point that you just made, that
Okay.
there is everything will eventually go back to like it was before the garden, or
in the beginning of the garden, right?
Right.
That is a premise that that all of Jewish history and all of learning is built on. Joe, do you want to say something?
Yes. How long ago did it begin, the 10 Minyan, when they were trying to repair what the 10 spies did? How long ago did that begin?
You're saying how long ago did Jewish law declare that it would require, I don't know, but I'm making myself a note to find out for you. But I'm guessing it was quite a long time ago.
Okay, great.
Okay. Okay. So we all know that Eve was cursed. Okay. And Adam was also cursed, and the snake was also cursed. But we're going to go back to Bereshit, to the book of Genesis, chapter 3, verse 16. This is the verse that speaks about the curses. To the woman he said, I shall surely increase your sorrow and your pregnancy. In pain you shall bear children, and to your husband will be your desire, and he will rule over you, which appears to be 4 curses. Okay. I will increase your sorrow, in pain you will bear children, to your husband will be your desire, and he will rule over you. In the Torah, it's only one verse, but there are many more curses that are elaborated on by the Talmud that teaches that this verse includes multiple curses. I'm just going to name some of them, okay? The discomfort that we have during our monthly cycle, the blood that comes from the loss of virginity, raising children with great trouble and sacrifice. In Hebrew, we call that tsar gittel banim, which is the I don't know, the pain, the difficulty of raising children. The fact that pregnancies cause distress and discomfort. Hashem's original plan was that a woman should give birth on the day that she conceived, and not have 9 months of pregnancy. That was part of the curse. Having pain in childbirth, that wasn't intended. The idea of a woman yearning for her husband rather than trying to escape as a slave does, women will seek out this relationship, and they will be very eager to marry. That's still the case. Your husband will dominate you. You will be confined to your home. You will not be able to appear in public with your hair uncovered. You will pierce your ear like the ear of a perpetual slave who does not want to go free after 6 years. Let's go into that a little bit more. That's a whole biblical thing. In the book of Shemot, in the book of Exodus, chapter 21, verses 5-6, here's the quote. So slavery in the Bible is not the same as what you might be thinking of like American slavery or any other slavery that the countries that you came in might have. And that is, it's a kind of indentured servitude in order to pay off a debt. So it is maximally a year, 6 years. And in the 7th year, the slave is supposed to go free. But and this is what it says in the book of Shemot, in the book of Exodus. If the slave says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go free, meaning he's saying, my situation's kind of sweet here. I want to stay and continue on because I'm not being abused. I'm working for someone else, but I am, I'm participating in something that's really working for me. And so what happens, you may know this, the master brings him to the judges, and then he brings him to a door or a doorpost, and he makes a hole in his ear with a sharp instrument, and then he is obligated to stay in this indentured servitude forever. So we have that model of a biblical slave whose ear becomes pierced as a sign that they had the opportunity for freedom, and they chose not to take it. You with me? So the Talmud says the fact that women pierce their ears, it's so interesting to me. I may be the only adult woman I know whose ears are not pierced, but not for this reason. I didn't learn this long ago. I didn't learn this until more recently. Anyway, is one of the curses that the Talmud elaborates on. Another one, that women are not accepted in a Beit Din. That's a whole very specific to Jewish law, that women can't serve as witnesses in a Jewish court. Sitting when you urinate, that's considered part of the curse. Lying beneath your husband during intercourse, that is what we know as the missionary position. And death. Okay, that's a big one. That was decreed into the world. These are, the Talmud is elaborating in the Torah, that is in the Bible itself. There's only that one verse, and the Talmud is saying there's all these implications for that, and all of these experiences that women have are derived from the way nature changed, the way God changed when he declared these verses on her. Now, what are some of these things that were true are still true, but they're becoming less true over time. So both Adam and Eve, both Adam and Chava, lost a measure of spiritual elevation, but Chava, who initiated the sin, and she convinced Adam to go along with it, she lost more spiritual perception than Adam, according to the principles, a Jewish principle, that a person who causes another person to sin is punished more than the one who did the sin. Okay, so that was a consequence. That's why the moon was diminished. That's why women are, if you if you look especially in rabbinic sources, there's a lot of what we might consider not nice stuff about the status of women there. There's more. Pain in childbirth. Pain in childbirth defies sort of a biological rule that a natural process is painless. Okay, when you breathe, unless you're not well, it doesn't hurt, right? When your heart beats, it doesn't hurt. When you digest your food, unless you've had really spicy dinner or something like that, in general, it doesn't hurt. Okay, when you urinate, it doesn't hurt unless you're sick in some way. So God changed the normal rules of nature to enable the rectification of Chava's sin. So what is the like the consequence of that, or that's not the right word, the corollary of that is that when a woman has pain in childbirth, she is somehow helping to complete the tikkun. Okay. Before the sin, here's another one. Before the sin, there was no economic need. You know, in the Garden of Eden, when everything was perfect, nobody had bank accounts. Okay. Nobody had bills to pay. Everything was provided. Well, whatever there were no clothing until after the sin, but the food was provided and fresh air was provided, and Adam and Chava and their children to some extent were able to just enjoy the world and connect with God without having to worry about finances. But everything after that changed, and women became dependent on men for their physical survival. So you know that there are times in history, we're not living in a time like that right now for most of us, but there were times in history when an unmarried woman, whether she was never married or widowed or divorced or whatever, she could not survive without attaching herself to a man. Okay, here's another manifestation of these sins, that after the sin, the nature of women changed from being abstract types to concrete types, more interested in and gifted with concrete activities like cooking, sewing, gardening, organizing the physical world, and less interested in intellectual activity and metaphysical contemplation. Now, again, this was then, it isn't necessarily now, but that's why men had the most important role in the abstract activity of Torah study. Even though there were exceptions throughout history, in general, women were, and to some extent are, more drawn to these concrete activities and less drawn, and this may not apply to you, especially because you're here studying Torah with me, but there are, I'm sure you know that there are certainly women like this. Okay. That is the sin and the consequence of the sin, and how it changed the hierarchy, but well, it introduced the hierarchy between men and women, and it changed the nature of women and kind of knocked women down. And all of human history has been an attempt to create a rectification for this sin. Now, let's look at the good news, okay? The fact that women had less spiritual potential than men as a result of the sin is promised, it's prophecy that it will change back in the future when the tikkun is complete. And this is what I can't say exactly when, but it is part of the messianic process. And women will once again have spiritual perception equal to men. This idea of women becoming equal to men is called in Hebrew nikeva tisovev gever, and it comes from Yirmiyahu, from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 31, verse 21. Here's one translation. For the Lord has created something new on the earth. A woman shall go after a man. Another translation is a woman shall encircle a man, a woman shall turn into a man. Now it doesn't mean that literally in the sense of gender transformation, but it means that a woman will become more like a man. Okay. There's a Rabbi Yonatan ben Uziel who lived in the time of Roman rule in Judea, who said that the prophecy of Nikeva Tisovev Gever, the concept of a woman turning into a man is linked to the ingathering of the exiles in Israel. So since the ingathering of the exiles is already happening, right? It's already happening incrementally. The prophecy of Nikeva Tisovev Gever is also gradually materializing. So let's look at some of the ways that this process has already begun. It's not an overnight thing. It's something that happens gradually over centuries, I guess, but let's look at things more specifically for right now. So 50 years ago, epidurals, which take away most of the pain of childbirth, became widely available. Now, I have two children. I had one with and one without. It was a completely different experience. And so although the woman's body still does the same things, the uterus is still contracting in the same way, a woman does with the advent of an epidural, a woman doesn't necessarily feel the pain of childbirth in the way that she would have without an epidural. Okay. Here's another way Nikeva Tisovev Gever is already starting. In Western society and in marriage, women are much more equal partners economically and personally. Many women earn their own living now, and they don't need a husband to support them. They may choose to get married for other reasons, but not for economic reasons. Another thing that's changed is that women's abstract abilities have already begun to change. Since the time the powers of Nikeva Tisovev Gever entered the world, which according to the Moon's Lost Light was about 100 years ago, women have become more capable of abstract learning, excuse me, including Torah learning. Women have entered the professional world, the world that requires abstract thinking in big numbers. In our lifetimes, there were professions that used to be closed to women, and that is no longer the case. Relating specifically to Jewish women and to Torah study, in the year around the year 1917, which is a little over 100 years ago, before that, there were no schools. There were no Jewish schools for girls to learn Torah. Whatever they learned at home. Their mothers taught them how to keep a kosher kitchen, how to keep Shabbat, maybe how to read Hebrew, how to read the prayers. Although in a lot of Eastern European, in that world, girls went to secular schools and they read in Yiddish. And so there's a whole literature of prayers and biblical commentaries that were printed in Yiddish, which would be kind of like doing it in English today, because girls didn't have the kind of education that boys had. But after 1917, there's a woman, her name was Sarah Schneer. She saw this problem in Jewish society. The boys were going to Jewish schools and they were learning Torah on advanced levels, and the girls were going to secular schools and they were learning secular subjects, and it was hard for them to make marriages because the boys' Torah learning was so much more advanced, and the girls basically didn't know anything, didn't know very much, and it was a huge divide. And this woman, Sarah Schneer, came to the rabbis and said, hang on a second, this is not good. We have to fix this. And her idea of fixing it was to teach girls more Torah. And so she created a network of schools that still exists today. It's called the Beis Yaakov movement. And so that started about 100 years ago. Okay. So we already see the parity beginning to be restored. We already see it in the ways that I've been talking about, that a woman can give birth without necessarily having significant pain, that women are much more equal partners with men. That's an ideal that we have in Western society, that women have the ability, many women, not all, have the ability for abstract thinking and have been successful in the professional world, and also have been studying Torah in a much more serious way. So we now have not just schools like for schoolgirls, but at least in the US and certainly in Israel, we have advanced schools of study just for women, for Torah study. And so women study Torah on the same high level as their male counterparts. So here now with this deeper understanding, we can see, I'll teach you another concept. Secular feminism is a response, can be seen as a response to the power of Nikeva Tisovev Gever coming into the world. Nikeva means feminine, Tisovev means like circular, and Gever means male. Okay, it's a very difficult expression to translate literally, but there's a teaching that Rabbi Pinchas Winston, one of my teachers, teaches that when the time has come in history for a certain change, a certain power that is destined to enter the world, if the Jewish people are not ready to fully embrace it, embrace this spiritual potential, it becomes diverted and it finds its expression in some non-kosher way. Okay. And in this light, secular feminism, which includes some values that are not in keeping with Torah values, can be seen as a reaction to and a distortion of the power of Nikeva Tisovev Gever. Something is happening in the world. It isn't it isn't necessarily coming in a pure, clean, holy way, but something's shifting in the world in terms of the status of women. But there's a little bit more that I have to share with you, and that is what other changes can we expect as the messianic process continues. Okay, so one is that the curse of he shall rule over you will disappear, and a wife will relate to her husband only out of love and not out of fear. There are some women and I hope none of us are among them, but there are some women who are trapped in marriages that are abusive, or whether physically abusive or economically abusive, whatever, that they can't get out of. That is still the case, unfortunately, in some marriages, but that's going to disappear. There will be complete gender equality. Not only that, but women will not be as involved in their time being taken by the burdens of homemaking, in order that they are entirely free to pursue spiritual things. Okay, so here's the story. This week was our older daughter's wedding anniversary, her 10th wedding anniversary, and my husband and I agreed that we would watch the kids for a couple of days while they went away. Now, my youngest child is 29 years old. So it's been a long time since I have been responsible for little kids, like on a full-time, the morning routine, the dinner routine, the bath, bedtime, that whole thing. Okay. And I could, while they were awake, I could not do anything else. Now, I know this is not a big shock. I mean, this is just how it goes with Kathy's laughing her head off. This is just how it goes when you have little kids. Okay. But I have not had to deal with that in a long time. And I understand that for many women, when they are raising children and when they are engaged in that, it takes up a huge amount of time. That's just the nature of it. Now, when your children are grown and you're in the stage of life that I'm in, an empty nest, whatever, you have a lot more time to dedicate to the kinds of things that you want to do with your time. But when you are a full-time mother and a full-time homemaker, that takes up all of your time. Okay. So so that's going to change. Now, one of the ways that it is possible to see that change is already beginning is that we have certain, for example, appliances that have made taking care of the home a whole lot easier. So instead of spending a half an hour washing the dinner dishes, you load them in the dishwasher and it does the work. Or instead of going down to the to the well to pump water so that your family has water, we now have, most of us have running water, and so on and so on. There are a number of advances that have happened in the world that we can begin to understand this process, how it's unfolding. We can begin to understand that women have more time now than they did in more difficult economic times. Okay. Also, women will study Torah in greater numbers. That is already happening, but that's going to be the task of everybody's job will not be, to whatever your job is, that won't be your job. Your job will be to connect with God and to study his word, as it was in the Garden of Eden. That was the original plan. Basically, God set up a situation where he said, I'm going to take care of all your physical needs, and your job is to work on growing close to me. Okay. Now, since the power of Nikeva Tisovev Gever has entered the world, even if people don't understand what is driving them, there is a great yearning for total equality, but we're not there yet. Okay. The time is not ripe for the complete fulfillment of this prophecy of Nikeva Tisovev Gever, because redemption is not fully here. And the tikkun, the rectification, is not complete. That's why we see it's a little complicated. We see both improvement and we see inequity at the same time. Having said that, this understanding does leave us with the promise that women will eventually be fully restored to their place, and the high spiritual light that Chava, and therefore all women whose souls were somehow contained in the great soul that Chava had, that high spiritual light will be restored, completely restored. And the gender dynamic that we have all been living through will be completely healed. Okay, that is what I prepared. Now I'd like to, let me just look at the comments to see if there's anything I want to respond to. And okay, let's talk about what Brittany said about being a helpmate. You probably have heard this from this idea that woman is a helpmate. And Devorah Fasthag, the author of The Moon's Lost Light, addresses this because there's two ways to be a helpmate. Okay. When a person accepts help, it might be because they are the powerful ones and people serve them. Okay, which is how if you think of like the 1950s, how, at least in the US, I don't know how it was in some other countries, but at least in the US in the 1950s, it was a very patriarchal kind of a marriage, and women served the men. They served them dinner. Dinner was ready when the man came home from work. And there was actually, I saw recently, maybe some of you have seen this, there were ads for cigarettes and for cars and for things like that, even for home appliances that today were like unbelievably sexist, that we would never, if I find it, I'll send it on to you. We would never be able to have an ad like that today. But so that's one kind of helpmate. There's another kind of helpmate that a person needs help because they are less accomplished, less experienced, weaker. They need assistance. Okay. So in Judaism, she asks, in Judaism, is the end goal to be an equal to man because they don't want to be helpmates? I always viewed women as being very powerful, just in different ways. So the end goal is that both male and female have complete spiritual parity, have the same access to God, have the same access to Torah study, and that in the same way that when God, going back to the parable of when God created the sun and the moon completely equally, and then the moon was diminished, that will be connected. There are many ways that you can look at a Jewish marriage, or you can look at the role of women in Judaism and see a lot of positive things. That does exist, but there is and there will continue to be, until this rectification has worked itself out, there are absolutely iniquities, and they continue to exist until such time as we are in the fullness of redemption, and everybody will understand that women have the same abstract thinking abilities, the same ability to learn Torah, the same ability to connect to God as we have always ascribed to men. This is in a Jewish context. Okay. Laura quotes something from Christian scripture, which I cannot speak to. I'm only sharing about the Jewish perspective. Okay. The same word for help me is used for God. Right, because God helps us. God helps us. Helping somebody else is not necessarily an indication of a lower status. Helping someone else is sometimes an indication, actually, that you have more, you have what to give, and you are giving to somebody who has less. Okay. Anybody want to open your mic? We have like 9 minutes left. Yes, Valerie, you want to say something?
Okay, just a quick question, because this was a surprising study for me, like, going through the Kamashes and stuff for a lot of years. And one of the things that kept being pointed out and has been pointed out is that the Jewish men have such a high opinion of the spiritualness of Sarah. One of the reasons that God told him to listen to his wife, but their commentary is that women are actually more spiritual than men. So would you comment on that based on how you are, how with the things that you've said today?
So, Kelly, I see you want to say something. Let me just answer this. I'll get to you. This is what I was saying sort of at the end, and that is we see both things at the same time. If you look in the Bible, you see actually Sarah's a good example. You see women who are very powerful, were very powerful, and were able to move certain things along. You do see that, but if you continue in Jewish history through the Mishnaic period and the Talmudic period, and through much of Jewish history, that reverence for women is often only lip service. That there are many ways that women have been disadvantaged spiritually or religiously in Jewish life in later history, and that's what I was speaking of. So there's a disconnect between what you might assume if you only read the Bible and what you understand if you know more of Jewish history. Does that answer your question?
Mhm.
Okay. Kelly, you want to say something or ask something?
Years ago, I heard something very parallel to this, and it was somebody talking about a Jewish wedding and why a woman encircles a man. And part of that was twofold. One, that they were there as a submission, but also as a protection. That as originally they were supposed to be help the man protect and keep the garden and everything, but because of the curse, then they were submitted, and that's why they encircle the man. The man does not encircle, but the women are the helpmate to protect the man. So I don't know if that plays into, if that was a true statement, or if that,
Okay, so you're pointing out the sort of the same point that I'm making, that you hear, is it that she is helping him or protecting him, or is it that she's submitting to him? Both things exist in Jewish thought at this stage. Now, for those of you that are not familiar, when a Jewish couple gets married, the tradition is that the groom is standing under the chuppah, under the marriage canopy, before the service begins, and the bride circles around him 7 times. 7 is a very significant number in Judaism, and you may have seen this if you've ever been to a Jewish wedding. The explanation I have heard is that she is building the walls of their home. Okay, because a woman in Jewish thinking, the woman is like the master of the home, and the man is sort of the master of the outside world. And that is one of the parallels of that, is the way that we are built physically, that a woman, her reproductive organs are inside. The woman is considered in Jewish thought more internal, and a man's reproductive organs are outside his body, and men are considered more external. And that may be lovely on one level, but what happens then is that if women are confined to the home, that they have no influence outside the home, it doesn't mean that they're influencing inside the home. I don't think even the most traditional, let me say, sexist Orthodox man today would would applaud and compliment the woman in her role as what is called a keret habayit, the woman who basically sets the tone in the home. But anything outside the home, whether it's Torah study or it's leadership in the community, or it's even synagogue attendance, working, economics, all that, he would consider that not her realm. Okay, so what you heard was sort of that exact contrast that exists right now, because we're not fully in redemptive times. So you can find, whether you want to make the argument that Judaism and Torah values women as spiritual beings, or you want to make the argument that Judaism and Torah treats women like second-class citizens, you can find evidence for both, because both are true, and they exist simultaneously at the stage that we are in. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Just, we have time for one more question or comment if anybody wants to say anything before we finish. Okay, so I'm going to recommend that for those of you that are interested in this topic, that I can send a link to this book, The Moon's Lost Light. It is very inexpensive. There's also a Kindle version that is even less expensive. I want to point out, just so that you know, that it looks like a book, but it is more like an extended essay, and it has 192 footnotes. Now, the footnotes are, and a few appendices. The footnotes are largely the Jewish sources that she got information from. There's also a glossary of Hebrew and Aramaic words at the end. So the book itself is only like 100 pages. Okay, wait, Andrea said, actually, a good bit of the disparity was not real, but perceived and traditional. The woman was equal, but not seen to be equal. I think a lot of that is seen in our roles. There's a lot of role reversal and confusion right now. Okay. The disparity is real in the sense that God changed the parity of the relationship between male and female. However, God doesn't, in human eyes, it's really very subtle. There's a very subtle nuance that the woman is definitely not seen to be equal in the eyes of humanity, but God doesn't judge in the same way. There's a verse about that. I can't call it up right now, but the idea that God doesn't perceive what in the same way that people perceive. So it's not that God looks down on women, even if society has and does, but I really want you to be left with the idea that it's getting better, right? That it's improving, and that there is this promise that it is going to get better. Laura, we have 1 minute for your comment, and that's all the time we have. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
So I find it really interesting that we're living in a culture and a time where there's so much gender confusion and issues about gender identity, and the whole transgender movement, where men want to become women and go through sex changes and this and that and the other. And then, the use of the bathroom, it's now a unisex bathroom and that sort of thing. And it's like, why is the enemy working so hard to take that which God defined as beautiful and good and to blur those boundaries? What's that all about? What are your thoughts?
Okay, I actually wrote about this, and I can send you the link to the blog, but very simply, I wrote about it more extensively, but you're absolutely right that these things are connected. Why? Because the power of Nikeva Tisovev Gever, which realigns the relationship between masculine and feminine, is in the world, even if people don't perceive it, they don't know what it is driving some of this behavior on the sort of the dark side, right? It's the underbelly of, so there's a movement to improve things dramatically for women and for everybody, because both men and women benefit when women can be fully express themselves. It benefits society, but it is the same thing that I was talking about secular feminism that has some values that we don't agree with, or that I don't agree with, that aren't traditional religious values. that when something comes into the world, it can get turned and skewed. And I absolutely believe that those things are connected. You're absolutely right.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Pleasure. All right.
Rivka,
Oh.
I think that your point about everything being restored is a very, very powerful point that I don't want that to get lost. I'm taking that with me today. At just the promise of the resurrection is absolutely amazing, of everything getting restored. It's going to be amazing.
I want to tell you that when I was first becoming religious, I read everything I could get my hands on about women in Judaism, and most of it made me nauseous. And I really struggled. And then I found this book, and it changed my entire paradigm, to the point where I have to tell you, this woman lives like, I don't know, about 10 miles from where we live. And for the last 7 or 8 years, we have been studying Torah together. And when I say studying Torah together, what I mean is she teaches me individually for an hour a week. So it's like a little private class between the author of this book and me. There's so much more to say about this topic, but Jody, thank you. That's a perfect note to end on. And that is the awareness that whatever you see in terms of women being not treated with every bit of their full humanity is a consequence of what happened in the Garden of Eden, and the promise is that it will be rectified. Okay. And with that, I bid you good night. I will send you, all right, I'm going to look up that thing about the timing of when Minyan became a thing. I'm going to send you the link to the book on Amazon, and also send you the blog post that I wrote about the distortion of this energy into the whole gender confusion world that we're living in. Okay. Thank you again very much for joining me.
Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye, guys.